Lady Catherine Whitmore had learned that widowhood was not just the absence of a husband, but the complete erasure of one's place in the world. At 26, she found herself adrift in a society that had no use for a woman without fortune, family, or protection. A ghost haunting the edges of ballrooms where she once belonged. When her late husband's debts consumed everything, leaving her with nothing but a mourning dress and a title that meant less than nothing without the wealth to support it, she discovered that grief was a luxury she could no longer afford. It was at Lady Pemberton's charity gala, while hiding in the conservatory to avoid the pitying stares and whispered speculations about her future, that she encountered Duke Robert Ashbourne, a man whose reputation for cold efficiency was matched only by his legendary solitude. She had not meant to speak her despair aloud, had not intended for anyone to hear her broken whisper, "I am so very lost." But he heard, and his response would change everything. "Then come home with me." What began as an offer of practical sanctuary would become something far more dangerous and beautiful. A love story that challenged every convention of their rigid society and proved that sometimes the most unlikely rescues come from the most unexpected hearts. The conservatory at Pemberton House was a refuge of glass and greenery, filled with the sweet scent of jasmine and the gentle sound of water trickling from a small fountain. Lady Catherine Whitmore had discovered this sanctuary quite by accident, fleeing the suffocating atmosphere of the charity gala, where she had become an object of curiosity rather than a welcome guest. She pressed her back against the cool glass wall and closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. The black silk of her mourning dress rustled softly as she sank onto a marble bench, her hands trembling as she removed her gloves. 6 months. It had been 6 months since Charles died, and still she felt as though she were drowning in a world that no longer had a place for her. "I am so very lost," she whispered to the empty air, the words escaping before she could stop them. It was the first time she had spoken her despair aloud, and the admission hung in the humid air like a confession. "Then come home with me." Catherine's eyes flew open, her heart racing as she realized she was not alone. A man stood in the doorway of the conservatory, tall and imposing, in perfectly tailored evening dress. Even in the dim light, she recognized him immediately. Robert Ashbourne, the Duke of Ravenswood, a man whose reputation preceded him into every room he entered. "Your Grace," Catherine stammered, rising quickly and attempting a curtsy despite her mortification. "I did not realize. I thought I was alone." "Clearly," he replied, his voice carrying the cultured tones of aristocracy, but lacking the warmth one might expect. Though I suspect that was rather the point. Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I apologize for my outburst. It was inappropriate and honest," the Duke interrupted, stepping into the conservatory with measured steps. A refreshing change from the carefully orchestrated pleasantries being exchanged in the ballroom. Up close, Robert Ashbourne was even more formidable than his reputation suggested. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair that showed the first hints of silver at the temples and steel-grey eyes that seemed to see everything. His face was lean and aristocratic, with sharp cheekbones, and a mouth that appeared unaccustomed to smiling. There was an air of controlled power about him, as if he were a man who had learned to command not just estates and servants, but his own emotions as well. "I should return to the gathering," Catherine said, though she made no move toward the door. "I'm sure you came here seeking solitude, not the company of a woman in my circumstances." "And what circumstances are those?" Robert asked, settling onto the bench across from her, with an ease that suggested he was accustomed to making himself comfortable wherever he chose. Catherine hesitated, unsure how to explain her situation without sounding either pitiable or bitter. "I am recently widowed, Your Grace. My husband left considerable debts, and I find myself without resources or prospects." "Ah," Robert said simply. "Hence the charity gala. You are here as a potential recipient rather than a benefactor." The blunt assessment stung, but Catherine appreciated his directness. "Yes, though I confess I am not entirely certain what form of charity I am seeking. Money, perhaps, or employment as a companion or governess. I have few skills that translate to gainful occupation." "But you have a title," Robert observed. "Lady Whitmore, if I recall correctly. Surely that carries some weight." Catherine's laugh was bitter. "A title without fortune is rather like a beautiful gown without the means to maintain it, Your Grace. It may impress at first glance, but the illusion quickly fades." Robert studied her with those penetrating grey eyes, and Catherine felt as though he were cataloguing every detail of her appearance and circumstances. She was acutely aware of how she must look. Her mourning dress was well made, but showed signs of careful mending. Her gloves were worn thin at the fingertips, and her jewelry consisted only of her wedding ring and a simple strand of pearls that had belonged to her mother. "Tell me about your husband," Robert said suddenly. "Charles?" Catherine was surprised by the request. "He was kind, gentle. We married when I was 19, and he was 15 years my senior. He had a small estate in Yorkshire, nothing grand, but it was comfortable. Or so I thought." "You loved him?" The question was asked with such matter-of-fact directness that Catherine found herself answering honestly. "I cared for him deeply. He was good to me, patient with my youth and inexperience. But love—" She paused, considering. "I'm not certain I knew what love was then. I was grateful to him, and I tried to be a good wife. And now? Now I discover that gratitude and affection were poor preparation for widowhood. Charles protected me from the realities of our finances, and I was too naive to ask questions. When he died, I learned that we had been living on borrowed money for years." Robert nodded as if this were a familiar story. "Debts of honor, I assume. Gaming, perhaps, or unwise investments." "Both," Catherine confirmed. "The creditors were kind enough to allow me to sell everything to settle the accounts, but there was nothing left afterward, nothing except my widow's pension, which is modest." "And your family?" "My parents died when I was 17. Charles was my guardian before he became my husband. I have some distant cousins, but we were never close, and they have made it clear that they consider me an unwelcome burden." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable exactly, but it was weighted with unspoken thoughts. Catherine found herself studying the Duke's face, trying to understand what he might be thinking. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that might have been sympathy. "You said you were lost," Robert said finally. "Yes." Catherine's voice was barely above a whisper. "I have no home, no family, no purpose. I exist at the sufferance of acquaintances who invite me to gatherings like this out of pity or duty. I am a reminder of how quickly fortune can change, how precarious our positions really are. People are kind, but they are also uncomfortable around me. Because you represent their fears," Robert said with understanding. "You are what any of them could become if fate turned against them." "Exactly." Catherine was surprised by his insight. "I have become a cautionary tale, a living reminder of mortality and misfortune. It is not a comfortable role." Robert was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fountain in the center of the conservatory. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "I live alone in a house with 47 rooms, he said. "I employ a staff of 32 people to maintain a household that serves only me. I have 3 estates, countless investments, and more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. And yet I am, in my own way, as lost as you are." Catherine looked at him in surprise. "How can that be? You have everything, position, wealth, respect." "I have possessions," Robert corrected. "I have responsibilities. But I do not have a home, not in any meaningful sense. I have houses, but they are empty of everything that makes a place worth inhabiting." "You have never married?" "No. I was engaged once, many years ago, but she died of fever before we could wed. Since then, I have found it easier to remain alone than to risk such loss again." The admission was made without emotion, but Catherine sensed the pain beneath his controlled exterior. "I'm sorry. That must have been devastating." "It was instructive," Robert replied. "It taught me that attachment leads to vulnerability, and vulnerability leads to pain. Better to remain independent." "And yet you are lonely," Catherine observed gently. Robert's smile was rueful, terribly. "But loneliness is a manageable affliction. Grief, I learned, is not." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Catherine found herself studying this enigmatic man who had stumbled upon her moment of despair and responded with such unexpected understanding. There was something about his controlled demeanor that spoke of deep feeling carefully contained, of a man who had learned to protect himself by maintaining distance from others. "Your Grace," Catherine said finally, "when you said I should come home with you, surely you were not serious." Robert turned to look at her directly, his grey eyes steady and serious. "I was entirely serious. You need a home, and I need company. Not romantic entanglement, not the complications of courtship and marriage, but simply the presence of another person who understands what it means to be alone. You are suggesting I become your what? Your housekeeper? Your companion?" I am suggesting you become my friend, Robert said simply. My guest, for as long as you choose to stay. You would have your own apartments, your own servants, complete independence within my household. In return, you would provide conversation, companionship, and perhaps help me remember what it feels like to have a home rather than merely a residence. Catherine stared at him in amazement. That is extraordinarily generous. But surely you must see how such an arrangement would appear to society. An unmarried woman living in the home of an unmarried man. Society will think what it chooses to think regardless of the truth, Robert replied. But if you are concerned about propriety, I can arrange for a suitable chaperone. My aunt, perhaps, or an elderly companion. The important thing is that you would be safe, comfortable, and free from the uncertainty that currently plagues you. Why? Catherine asked. Why would you make such an offer to someone you barely know? Robert considered the question seriously. Because I recognize something in you that I see in myself. You are not broken by your circumstances, merely displaced by them. You have dignity, intelligence, and strength, but you lack the resources to rebuild your life. I have resources in abundance, but I lack purpose. Perhaps we can help each other. And if it doesn't work, if we find ourselves incompatible, then you will leave with my blessing and a settlement generous enough to establish yourself independently wherever you choose, Robert said. You risk nothing by accepting my offer, Lady Whitmore, but you risk everything by refusing it. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness of his proposal. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Robert replied gently. Say you will give us both a chance to discover what it means to have a home again. Catherine looked around the conservatory, at the lush plants and flowing water that created such a peaceful sanctuary, then back at the man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to voice. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will come home with you. Robert's smile was the first genuine expression of warmth she had seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. Then let us leave this gathering of well-meaning but ultimately useless charity and begin our experiment in mutual rescue. As they rose to leave the conservatory, Catherine felt something she had not experienced in months. Hope. She was still lost, still uncertain about the future, but for the first time since Charles's death, she was not alone. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with the support of a man who understood loneliness as well as she did, and who was brave enough to offer sanctuary to a stranger in need. The widow who had whispered her despair to the darkness was about to discover that sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected forms, and that home is not always a place, sometimes it is a person willing to share their solitude with yours. Ashbourne House. The Duke of Ravenswood's London residence was everything Catherine had expected, and nothing she had prepared herself for. Ashbourne House stood on Grosvenor Square like a monument to aristocratic power, its Georgian facade imposing and elegant in the morning light. As their carriage drew up to the front entrance, Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness that had nothing to do with the grandeur of her surroundings and everything to do with the magnitude of the decision she had made. Having second thoughts? Robert asked, noting her hesitation as the footman opened the carriage door. Third and fourth thoughts, Catherine admitted. This is rather overwhelming. The house or the situation? Both. Catherine accepted the footman's assistance in alighting from the carriage, her eyes travelling up the imposing facade. I confess I had not fully considered what it would mean to live in such grandeur. It's just a house, Robert said, though his tone suggested he understood her intimidation. Admittedly a large one, but still just walls and rooms and furniture. The people who inhabit it are what give it character. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a distinguished elderly man in impeccable livery. Your Grace, he said with a bow. Welcome home. Thank you, Hartwell. This is Lady Whitmore, who will be staying with us indefinitely. Please see that the Rose Suite is prepared for her, and arrange for Mrs. Pembroke to attend her at her convenience. Of course, Your Grace. Lady Whitmore. The butler's bow to Catherine was respectful, but not subservient, and she sensed that he was taking her measure just as she was taking his. The entrance hall was magnificent, all marble and crystal and soaring ceilings that seemed to dwarf the people who moved through them. Catherine had grown up in comfortable circumstances and had visited grand houses before, but Ashbourne House was on a scale that spoke of centuries of accumulated wealth and power. Mrs. Pembroke is my housekeeper, Robert explained as they walked through the hall. She's been with the family for 30 years and knows the house better than I do. She'll help you settle in and answer any questions you might have. And the staff? How will you explain my presence? I'll tell them the truth. that you are my guest and are to be treated with every courtesy and consideration. They're well-trained and discreet. Your privacy will be respected." They climbed a grand staircase that curved gracefully to the first floor, passing portraits of long-dead Ashbournes who seemed to watch their progress with painted eyes. Catherine found herself wondering what those aristocratic ancestors would think of their descendants' decision to offer sanctuary to a penniless widow. "Here we are," Robert said, stopping before a set of double doors. "The Rose Suite. I thought you might appreciate having your own sitting room as well as a bedroom." He opened the doors to reveal a beautiful apartment decorated in soft shades of rose and cream. The sitting room was elegant but comfortable, with a fireplace, writing desk, and comfortable chairs arranged near tall windows that overlooked the square. Through an open doorway, Catherine could see the bedroom beyond, equally lovely and welcoming. "It's beautiful," Catherine said, moving to the windows to look out at the garden square below. "Much more beautiful than anything I had expected. I'm glad you approve. Your maid should arrive shortly with your belongings, and Mrs. Pembroke will be up to discuss any arrangements you might need." Catherine turned from the window, suddenly aware that they were alone in what would be her private chambers. "Your Grace, I feel I should say something about the propriety of this arrangement." "What about it?" "Well, surely you must see how it will appear. A widow of modest means, living in the home of an unmarried duke. People will assume I am your mistress." Robert's expression grew serious. "And does that concern you?" "It concerns me for your sake more than my own," Catherine said honestly. "My reputation is already somewhat tattered by my circumstances. But you have a position to maintain, a legacy to protect. I would not want my presence here to damage that." "Catherine," Robert said, and she noticed that he used her given name naturally, without the formal distance of their first meeting. "I am 36 years old, I have never married, and I live alone by choice. Society has been speculating about my personal life for years. One more rumor will hardly signify. But if it becomes more than rumor, if people begin to cut you, or refuse invitations, then I will know who my true friends are," Robert interrupted gently, "and I will discover that I care far less about society's approval than I once thought." Catherine studied his face, trying to understand this man who seemed so willing to risk his reputation for her comfort. "Why are you doing this? Really? I cannot believe it is simply loneliness that motivates such generosity." Robert was quiet for a moment, moving to look out the window as she had done. "Do you know what it's like to have everything you're supposed to want and discover that it means nothing? To wake up every morning in a house full of servants and realize that no one there cares whether you live or die beyond how it might affect their employment?" "I'm beginning to understand," Catherine said softly. "I have spent 15 years building walls around myself, convincing myself that independence was strength and solitude was safety, and perhaps it was for a time. But lately I find myself wondering what the point of all this," he gestured around the elegant room, "really is. What legacy am I building? What purpose does any of it serve?" "You have responsibilities," Catherine pointed out. "Tenants, servants, investments that support countless families." "Yes, and I fulfill those responsibilities conscientiously, but that's duty, not purpose. Duty is what you do because you must. Purpose is what you do because it matters to you personally." Catherine moved closer to him, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. "And you think I might help you find that purpose?" "I think you might help me remember what it feels like to have someone to care about," Robert said simply. "Someone whose welfare matters to me not because of obligation or duty, but because I choose for it to matter." The admission hung in the air between them, more intimate than any physical touch. Catherine felt her heart skip as she realized the depth of trust he was placing in her, the risk he was taking by allowing her into his carefully controlled world. "And if I disappoint you?" she asked. "If I prove to be not what you hoped, or if I become a burden rather than a companion, then we will both have learned something valuable about ourselves," Robert replied. "But I don't think you will disappoint me, Catherine. I think you will surprise me, challenge me, and perhaps help me become a better man than I have been." A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation, and Robert moved away from the window. "That will be Mrs. Pembroke. I'll leave you to settle in and become acquainted with the household routine. We dine at 8, but if you prefer to take your meals privately at first, that can certainly be arranged." "No," Catherine said quickly. "If I am to be your companion, then that is, I would like to dine with you, if that's acceptable." Robert's smile was warm and genuine. "It's more than acceptable. It's exactly what I hoped you would say. After he left, Catherine sank into one of the comfortable chairs and tried to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. In the space of 12 hours, she had gone from desperate uncertainty to, what? Security, certainly. Comfort, undoubtedly. But there was something else. Something in the way Robert looked at her and spoke to her that suggested this arrangement might become far more complex than either of them had anticipated. Mrs. Pembroke proved to be a woman of middle years with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that immediately put Catherine at ease. "His Grace has explained the situation," she said as she supervised the unpacking of Catherine's modest wardrobe. "You're to be treated as an honored guest with full access to the house and grounds. Is there anything particular you'll be needing?" "I confess I'm not entirely certain," Catherine admitted. "This is all rather new to me." "Well, you'll want a lady's maid, certainly. I can arrange for one of the housemaids to attend you, or we can hire someone specifically for your needs." "One of the housemaids would be perfectly adequate," Catherine said quickly. "I don't wish to cause unnecessary expense or trouble." Mrs. Pembroke's expression softened. "My lady, if I may speak plainly, His Grace is one of the wealthiest men in England. The cost of a lady's maid would not even register in his household accounts. And he's given specific instructions that you're to have whatever you need to be comfortable." "He's been very kind," Catherine said. "He has indeed. And if I may say so, it's good to see him taking an interest in something beyond his ledgers and correspondence. The Duke is a good man, but he's been alone too long. Perhaps your presence here will remind him that there's more to life than duty and responsibility." That evening, Catherine dressed carefully for dinner, choosing her best black silk gown and her mother's pearls. She was nervous about this first formal meal, uncertain about the protocols of her unusual situation. Was she a guest? A companion? Something else entirely? She found Robert in the drawing room, elegant in evening dress and reading what appeared to be a business letter. He looked up as she entered, and his expression of appreciation was unmistakable. "You look lovely," he said, rising to greet her. "I hope you've found everything to your satisfaction." "More than satisfactory. Your Mrs. Pembroke is wonderful, and the rooms are beautiful. I feel rather like I'm living in a fairy tale." "A fairy tale with a very practical foundation," Robert said with amusement. "Shall we go into dinner? I thought we might use the smaller dining room. The formal one is rather overwhelming for 2 people." The smaller dining room was still grander than anything Catherine was accustomed to, but it felt more intimate, more conducive to conversation. As they were served by silent, efficient footmen, Catherine found herself relaxing into the rhythm of civilized discourse. "Tell me about your day," Robert said as they began the first course. "How did you find your introduction to Ashbourne House?" "Overwhelming and wonderful in equal measure," Catherine replied honestly. "Your staff has been incredibly welcoming, though I suspect they're all desperately curious about my presence here." "Undoubtedly, but they're well trained in discretion. You needn't worry about gossip originating from within the household." "And gossip from without?" Robert's expression grew thoughtful. "There will be talk, certainly. London society thrives on speculation and scandal. But I've found that the best way to handle gossip is to live one's life with integrity and let others draw their own conclusions. You make it sound simple. It is simple, though not necessarily easy. The question is whether you're prepared for the scrutiny that will inevitably come." Catherine considered this as she sipped her wine. "I suppose I have little choice but to be prepared. The alternative is to return to my previous circumstances, and I confess I have no desire to do that." "Good. Then we'll face whatever comes together, as friends and allies." The word friends hung in the air between them, and Catherine found herself wondering if that was truly all Robert intended their relationship to be. There was something in his manner toward her, a warmth and attention that seemed to go beyond mere companionship. But perhaps she was reading too much into his kindness, projecting her own growing attraction onto his behavior. "Robert," she said, then paused, uncertain whether she should use his given name. "Please," he said, understanding her hesitation. "We're to be living in the same house, sharing meals and conversation. Formality would be rather absurd under the circumstances." "Robert, then, I wanted to ask, what exactly do you envision for this arrangement? What are your expectations of me?" "I have no expectations beyond your company," he replied. "I hope we will become friends, that we will enjoy each other's conversation, that perhaps you will help me entertain when I have guests. But beyond that, I want you to feel free to live as you choose, to pursue whatever interests you, to make this house your home in whatever way feels natural to you." "And if feelings develop beyond friendship?" Catherine asked, her cheeks warming at her own boldness. Robert's gaze intensified, and she saw something flicker in his grey eyes that might have been hope. "Then we will address that possibility when and if it arises," he said carefully. "But I want you to know that I have no ulterior motives in offering you sanctuary. I am not expecting or demanding anything beyond what you freely choose to give." "I believe you," Catherine said, "and I want you to know that I am grateful beyond words for your kindness. Whatever this becomes, you have given me something I thought I had lost forever, hope for the future." "Then we are even," Robert said softly, "because you have given me something I thought I no longer wanted, a reason to care about tomorrow." As they continued their meal, Catherine felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a warm cloak. She was still uncertain about the future, still navigating the complex emotions of her situation, but for the first time in months, she felt as though she belonged somewhere. The widow who had whispered her despair in a conservatory had found not just shelter, but the possibility of something far more precious, a chance to build a new life with a man who understood loneliness as well as she did, and who was brave enough to risk his heart again. Finding home. 3 weeks into her residence at Ashbourne House, Catherine had settled into a routine that felt both natural and surprisingly comfortable. Her days were filled with small pleasures she had almost forgotten existed. Leisurely breakfasts in the morning room, afternoons reading in the magnificent library, walks in the private garden that adjoined the house. Most importantly, she had begun to understand the man who had so unexpectedly rescued her from despair. Robert Ashbourne was nothing like what she had expected from his reputation. Society painted him as cold, aloof, impossibly demanding. In reality, he was thoughtful, intelligent, and possessed of a dry wit that emerged once he felt comfortable in someone's presence. He was also, Catherine realized, profoundly lonely despite his wealth and position. "You're brooding again," Catherine observed as she entered the library one afternoon to find Robert staring out the window with a frown. "I don't brood," Robert replied without turning around. "I contemplate, thoughtfully and with great dignity." "Ah, my mistake. You were contemplating with unusual intensity then. What weighty matter has captured your attention?" Robert turned from the window with a rueful smile. "Lady Pemberton has invited us to a dinner party next week. Both of us, specifically. It appears our arrangement has become a subject of considerable interest." Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness. "Our first public appearance together. Are you having second thoughts?" "Are you?" I asked first. "So you did." Robert moved to the chair across from hers, settling into it with the graceful economy of movement she had come to associate with him. "No, I'm not having second thoughts, but I am concerned about subjecting you to what will undoubtedly be intense scrutiny." "I can handle scrutiny," Catherine said with more confidence than she felt. "I'm more concerned about the impact on your reputation. Once we appear together publicly, there will be no going back. Society will draw its conclusions, and those conclusions will follow you long after I'm gone." "After you're gone?" Robert's voice sharpened. "Are you planning to leave?" "No," Catherine said quickly. "That is, I have no immediate plans to leave. But surely this arrangement was never intended to be permanent. Why not?" The simple question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither had yet dared to voice. Catherine felt her heart race as she realized they were approaching territory that had been carefully avoided in their weeks of growing friendship. "Because," Catherine said carefully, "you are a duke, and I am a widow of modest origins, with no fortune and no connections. Because this situation, however comfortable it has become, is fundamentally irregular." "Irregular," Robert repeated. "An interesting choice of words. Do you find our friendship irregular, Catherine?" "Our friendship, no. But the circumstances of it, the living arrangement, the way people will perceive it, yes, that's irregular." "And does that trouble you?" Catherine considered the question seriously. "It should trouble me more than it does," she admitted. "I was raised to value propriety and convention, but I find that I care less about society's opinion than I do about this. About what we've built here." "And what have we built?" Robert asked softly. "A home," Catherine said without hesitation. "A real home, not just a place to live. We've built friendship and trust and something I'm not quite ready to name." Robert leaned forward in his chair, his grey eyes intense. "Then name it now. What is this thing between us that we're both so carefully dancing around?" Catherine felt her breath catch. "Robert, I love you," he said simply, the words falling into the quiet library like stones into still water. "I didn't plan to, didn't want to, But I do. I love your intelligence, your strength, your refusal to be pitied or patronized. I love the way you've brought life to this house, the way you've made me remember what it feels like to have someone to care about." Catherine stared at him, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "You love me, desperately, completely, against all reason and contrary to every wall I've built around my heart for the past 15 years. Robert's voice was steady, but she could see the vulnerability in his eyes. "And I hope, that you might feel something similar for me." "I do," Catherine whispered. "I love you too, though I've been afraid to admit it even to myself." "Why afraid?" "Because it changes everything. Because once we acknowledge this, we can't go back to being simply friends. Because I'm terrified of losing what we have by wanting more." Robert rose from his chair and moved to kneel beside hers, taking her hands in his. "Catherine, look at me." She met his gaze, seeing in it all the tenderness and passion she had been afraid to hope for. "You will not lose what we have," he said firmly. "Our friendship, our trust, our companionship, those are the foundation of what we are building. Love doesn't replace them, it strengthens them. But the complications will be worth it," Robert interrupted gently. "Catherine, I have spent 15 years avoiding complications, avoiding risk, avoiding anything that might cause me pain. And what has it gotten me? A lonely existence in a beautiful house, surrounded by luxury but empty of meaning. You've given me back my life, my purpose, my hope for the future. Whatever complications come with loving you, they are a small price to pay for the joy you've brought me." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "I never thought I would love again. After Charles died, I thought that part of my life was over forever. And now? Now I realize that what I felt for Charles was affection and gratitude, but not the deep, consuming love I feel for you. You've shown me what it means to love someone completely, to want to build a life with them, to choose them every day." Robert brought her hands to his lips, pressing gentle kisses to her knuckles. "Then marry me," he said. "Make this arrangement permanent and proper, and everything society expects it to be." Catherine's breath caught. "Robert, I know it's sudden. I know we've only known each other for a few weeks, but I also know that I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're here, knowing you're mine, knowing that we're building something together that will last." "Yes," Catherine said, the word escaping before she could think better of it. "Yes, I'll marry you." Robert's smile was radiant as he rose and pulled her into his arms. "You're certain? You're not just caught up in the moment?" "I'm certain," Catherine said, reaching up to touch his face. "I love you, Robert Ashbourne, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." When he kissed her, it was with all the passion and tenderness that had been building between them for weeks. Catherine felt herself melt into his embrace, finally allowing herself to acknowledge the depth of her feelings for this remarkable man who had rescued her from despair and given her a future beyond her wildest dreams. "When?" Robert asked when they finally broke apart. "When what? When shall we marry? I confess I'm rather eager to make you my Duchess officially, as well as practically." Catherine laughed, feeling giddy with happiness and relief. "Soon," she said. "But perhaps we should attend Lady Pemberton's dinner party first, as an engaged couple, rather than as the subject of scandalous speculation." "An excellent idea. Let society see that our arrangement has a perfectly respectable conclusion. And if they don't approve? Then they can go to hell," Robert said cheerfully. "I have everything I want right here in my arms." That evening, they dined together as they had every night since Catherine's arrival. But everything felt different now that their feelings were acknowledged and their future secured. The conversation flowed easily between them, touching on everything from their wedding plans to their hopes for the future. "I want to do something useful with my life," Catherine said as they lingered over dessert. "Something more than just being a decorative duchess. What did you have in mind?" "I'm not certain yet. Perhaps charity work or supporting causes that matter to me. I know what it feels like to be lost and desperate, and I'd like to help others who find themselves in similar circumstances." "I think that's a wonderful idea," Robert said, "and I'd like to help if you'll let me. We could establish a foundation, perhaps, to assist widows and other women who find themselves without resources or protection." Catherine felt her heart swell with love for this man, who not only understood her desires, but wanted to support them. "You would do that?" "I would do anything for you," Robert said simply. "Anything that would make you happy. Anything that would give your life meaning and purpose." "I love you," Catherine said, the words still feeling new and wonderful on her tongue. "And I love you. More than I thought possible." more than I ever dared hope for. As they made their way upstairs that evening, stopping outside Catherine's door, the awareness of their changed relationship hung in the air between them. They were engaged now, committed to a future together, but they were not yet married. The question of propriety, of how far their newfound intimacy should extend, remained unspoken but present. "Catherine," Robert said softly, "I want you to know that nothing has to change in terms of our living arrangements until we're married. I don't want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable." "And if I wanted something to change?" Catherine asked boldly. Robert's eyes darkened with desire, but his voice remained steady. "Then we would talk about it, honestly and openly, and decide together what feels right for us." Catherine reached up to touch his face, marveling at the way he leaned into her caress. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would like very much to be kissed goodnight by my fiancé." Robert's smile was tender as he obliged, kissing her with a passion that left them both breathless. When they parted, his forehead rested against hers, and Catherine could feel the tension in his body as he fought for control. "Good night, my love," he whispered. "Good night," Catherine replied, her heart full of joy and anticipation for the future they would build together. As she prepared for bed that night, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. 3 weeks ago, she had been a lost, desperate widow with no prospects and no hope. Tonight, she was the beloved fiancée of one of England's most eligible dukes, with a future full of love and purpose stretching before her. The widow who had whispered her despair in a conservatory had found not just a home, but a love that would sustain her for the rest of her life. And the duke who had offered sanctuary to a stranger had discovered that sometimes the greatest risks yield the most precious rewards. Society's judgment. Lady Pemberton's dinner party was the social event of the week, and Catherine knew that every eye in the room would be upon her and Robert as they made their first public appearance as an engaged couple. She had chosen her attire carefully, a gown of deep sapphire silk that complemented her coloring and spoke of quiet elegance rather than ostentation. Robert had insisted on having his jeweler create a betrothal ring for her, a stunning sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the light beautifully. "You look magnificent," Robert said, as they waited in the entrance hall for their carriage to be brought around. "Though I confess I'm rather nervous about sharing you with society this evening." "Nervous?" Catherine raised an eyebrow. "The Duke of Ravenswood? Nervous about a dinner party?" "Nervous about the gossips and fortune hunters, who will undoubtedly see you as either a scandal to be whispered about or a threat to be eliminated," Robert replied grimly. "I'm not sure which will be worse." "I can handle both," Catherine assured him, though she felt butterflies in her stomach at the thought of the evening ahead. "Besides, we'll be together. Whatever happens, we'll face it as a team." The Pemberton house was ablaze with lights when they arrived, and Catherine could see curious faces peering from windows as their carriage drew up to the entrance. The moment of truth had arrived. Lady Pemberton greeted them with enthusiasm that seemed only slightly forced. "Your Grace." "And Lady Whitmore, how lovely to see you again. I understand congratulations are in order." "Indeed they are," Robert replied smoothly, his hand warm and reassuring on Catherine's back. "Lady Whitmore has done me the honor of accepting my proposal." "How wonderful!" Lady Pemberton's smile was bright, but Catherine caught the calculating look in her eyes. "Such a romantic story, I'm sure. You must tell me all about it." As they moved into the drawing room, Catherine was acutely aware of the conversations that stopped abruptly as they passed, the curious stares, the whispered comments behind fans. She kept her chin high and her expression serene, drawing strength from Robert's steady presence beside her. "Ashbourne." Lord Pemberton approached with a hearty smile and a firm handshake. "Heard the news, of course. Congratulations, old man." "Lady Whitmore, a pleasure to see you again." "Thank you, Lord Pemberton," Catherine replied gracefully. "You're very kind." "Not at all, not at all. Always happy to see a good match, though I must say it was quite a surprise. Didn't know you two were acquainted." "We met at your wife's charity gala," Robert said easily. "Sometimes the most important encounters happen when we least expect them." As the evening progressed, Catherine found herself navigating a complex social minefield. Some guests were genuinely warm and welcoming, pleased to see Robert happy and settled. Others were coolly polite, clearly disapproving of the match, but too well-bred to express their feelings openly. Still others were openly curious, asking pointed questions about their courtship and engagement that bordered on impertinent. "Such a whirlwind romance," observed Lady Hartwell, a woman known for her sharp tongue and sharper observations. You've only been acquainted for a few weeks, haven't you? Sometimes the heart knows what it wants immediately, Catherine replied calmly. I consider myself fortunate that His Grace felt the same way. Indeed. And your late husband? You were married to Lord Whitmore for several years, were you not? 7 years, Catherine confirmed, recognizing the trap being laid. He was a good man, and I mourned his loss deeply, but I've learned that honoring the dead doesn't require abandoning life. How practical of you, Lady Hartwell said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Robert appeared at Catherine's elbow, his expression pleasant, but his voice carrying a subtle warning. Lady Hartwell, how delightful to see you. I trust you're enjoying the evening? Oh yes, Your Grace. I was just getting acquainted with your charming fiancé. Such an interesting story, how you met. Interesting indeed, Robert agreed, though I find the future far more compelling than the past, don't you? The conversation moved on, but Catherine was left with the distinct impression that Lady Hartwell would be spreading her own version of events throughout London's drawing rooms within days. At dinner, Catherine found herself seated between Lord Pemberton and a young man introduced as Mr. Fitzwilliam, who seemed determined to flirt despite her obvious engagement. Across the table, she could see Robert engaged in conversation with Lady Pemberton and another woman, though his eyes frequently found hers with reassuring warmth. I must say, Lady Whitmore, Mr. Fitzwilliam said, as the second course was served, you've certainly caused quite a stir in society. Capturing the heart of the elusive Duke of Ravenswood, quite an accomplishment. I hardly think of it as an accomplishment, Catherine replied coolly. Love is not a conquest, Mr. Fitzwilliam. It's a gift freely given and received. Of course, though one must admire your timing. A widow in reduced circumstances, finding love with one of England's wealthiest dukes. Quite fortunate, really. Catherine felt her temper rise at the implication, but before she could respond, Lord Pemberton intervened smoothly. Fitzwilliam, I believe you're wanted in the drawing room. Something about settling a wager regarding the races. As the young man reluctantly excused himself, Lord Pemberton turned to Catherine with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry about that, my dear. Young men can be thoughtless in their conversation. Thank you, Catherine said gratefully, though I suspect I'll need to grow accustomed to such comments. Perhaps, but you'll find that those who matter will judge you by your character, not your circumstances. And anyone who knows Ashbourne knows he's not a man to be swayed by fortune hunters or social climbers. His regard for you speaks volumes about your worth. The kindness in his voice was genuine, and Catherine felt some of her tension ease. Not everyone in society would be hostile to their match. After dinner, as the ladies withdrew to the drawing room, while the gentlemen enjoyed their port, Catherine found herself the centre of attention in a way that was both flattering and uncomfortable. Lady Pemberton seated her in a place of honour and immediately began what amounted to an interrogation disguised as friendly conversation. Now then, my dear, Lady Pemberton said, settling herself with obvious relish, you simply must tell us everything. How did the Duke propose? Was it terribly romantic? Catherine was acutely aware that every word she spoke would be dissected and repeated throughout London society. It was perfect, she said simply. He proposed in his library, surrounded by books and afternoon sunlight. It was intimate and sincere, exactly what I would have chosen. And the wedding? When will it take place? Soon, Catherine replied. We see no reason to delay when we're both certain of our feelings. How refreshing, said Lady Hartwell with false sweetness, though some might say a longer engagement would be more appropriate, given your recent widowhood. My period of mourning ended months ago, Catherine said firmly, and I believe my late husband would want me to be happy rather than spending my life in perpetual grief. Of course, though one does wonder what attracted the Duke to you so suddenly. He's been quite the confirmed bachelor for so many years. Catherine felt her patience wearing thin, but she maintained her composure. Perhaps you should ask him that question yourself, Lady Hartwell. I'm hardly qualified to speak for His Grace's feelings. Oh, but surely you must have some idea. Was it love at first sight? Or did your circumstances play a role in his decision to offer marriage? The implication was clear, and Catherine felt her cheeks burn with indignation. Before she could respond, however, a new voice entered the conversation. I believe, said the Dowager Countess of Westbrook, a formidable woman in her 70s whose opinion carried significant weight in society, that we are being rather impertinent in our curiosity. Lady Whitmore owes us no explanations for her private affairs. Of course not, Lady Hartwell said quickly, clearly chastened by the Dowager's intervention. I merely meant, I'm sure you meant well. The the Dowager said with a smile that was both gracious and dismissive. "Lady Whitmore, I knew your mother slightly. She was a lovely woman, and I can see her grace and dignity in you. The Duke is fortunate to have won your affections." "Thank you, my lady," Catherine said, feeling a rush of gratitude for the unexpected support. "That's very kind of you to say." When the gentleman rejoined them, Robert immediately sought out Catherine, his eyes scanning her face for signs of distress. "How are you faring?" he asked quietly. "Well enough," Catherine replied, "though I think I'm beginning to understand why you prefer solitude to society gatherings." "That bad?" "Not all of it. The Dowager Countess of Westbrook was very kind, and Lord Pemberton has been a perfect gentleman, but there are others who seem determined to find scandal where none exists." Robert's expression darkened. "Who has been impertinent? I'll speak to them immediately." "No," Catherine said quickly, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "That would only make things worse. I can handle a few pointed comments and raised eyebrows. What I cannot handle is you fighting my battles for me and confirming their suspicions that I'm some helpless creature who trapped you into marriage." "You're right, of course," Robert said, though his jaw remained tight with suppressed anger. "But I hate seeing you subjected to their petty cruelties." "It's the price we pay for defying convention," Catherine said philosophically. "But I'd rather face their disapproval as your wife than live safely as a lonely widow. Wouldn't you?" Robert's expression softened, and he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles in full view of the assembled company. "Every day for the rest of my life," he said quietly. The gesture was both tender and defiant, a clear statement that he was proud of his choice and unashamed of their love. Catherine felt her heart swell with pride and affection for this man who was willing to face society's censure for her sake. The remainder of the evening passed more smoothly, though Catherine was aware of the continued scrutiny and whispered conversations that followed their every move. When they finally took their leave, she felt exhausted from the effort of maintaining her composure under such intense observation. "Well," Robert said as their carriage pulled away from the Pemberton house, "that was illuminating." "Indeed. I think we can expect to be the subject of considerable gossip for the foreseeable future. Does that concern you?" Catherine considered the question seriously. "It concerns me for your sake more than my own. I've already lost everything once. I know I can survive social ostracism if necessary, but you have a position to maintain, a legacy to protect. I would hate for our marriage to damage that." "Catherine," Robert said, taking her hand in his, "look at me." She turned to face him in the dim carriage, seeing the intensity in his grey eyes, even in the flickering light from the street lamps. "I have spent my entire adult life living according to society's expectations," he said firmly. "I've been the perfect duke, the model of propriety and responsibility. And what has it gotten me? A lonely existence in a beautiful house, surrounded by people who respect my title but care nothing for me as a man. You've shown me what it means to be truly alive, truly happy. Do you think I would sacrifice that for the good opinion of people who would abandon me the moment my fortune disappeared? But your reputation will survive a few raised eyebrows and whispered comments, and those who truly matter will judge our marriage by its fruits, not by the circumstances that brought us together. In time, when they see how happy we are, when they witness the love between us, the gossip will die down, and we'll simply be another married couple in society." "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple, though not easy. We love each other, Catherine. We're going to build a life together based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. What could be more respectable than that?" Catherine leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his warmth and certainty. "I love you," she said softly, "and I promise you won't regret choosing me, regardless of what society thinks." "I could never regret choosing love over loneliness," Robert replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Never." The following weeks brought a flurry of activity as they planned their wedding and navigated the complex social landscape of London society. Some doors remained closed to them, but others opened wider than before. Catherine discovered that there were many people who admired their love story, who found it romantic rather than scandalous that a duke had chosen love over social advantage. The Dowager Countess of Westbrook proved to be a particularly valuable ally, using her considerable influence to smooth their path in society. "I like a good love story," she told Catherine over tea one afternoon, "and I despise the sort of petty-minded gossips who would condemn happiness simply because it doesn't follow conventional patterns." "You've been very kind to us," Catherine said gratefully. "I know your support means a great deal to Robert." "The Duke is a good man who deserves happiness," the Dowager replied, "and you, my dear, are exactly what he needs. Someone who sees the man rather than the title, someone who challenges him to be better than he thought possible." "How can you be so certain?" "Because I've watched him these past weeks. He's more alive, more engaged with the world than I've seen him in years. That's the mark of a woman's positive influence on a man's life." As their wedding day approached, Catherine found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she had been a desperate widow with no prospects and no hope. Now she was about to become a duchess, married to a man who loved her completely and whom she loved in return. "Having second thoughts?" Robert asked one evening as they walked in his private garden, enjoying the mild spring air. "Third and fourth thoughts," Catherine admitted. "Not about marrying you, never about that, but about whether I'm truly ready to be a duchess, to take on all the responsibilities and expectations that come with the title." "You'll be magnificent," Robert said with complete confidence. "You have intelligence, compassion, and strength of character. Those are the qualities that matter, not bloodlines or social connections. And if I make mistakes, if I embarrass you or fail to live up to what people expect, then we'll face those challenges together, as we've faced everything else. Catherine, you're not alone in this. We're partners, equals in our marriage regardless of what society might think. Your success is my success, your happiness is my happiness." They had stopped beside a fountain, the sound of water providing a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. Catherine turned to face him, marveling once again at how handsome he was, how lucky she was to have won his love. "I have something for you," Robert said suddenly, reaching into his jacket pocket. "A wedding gift, though I suppose it's rather early." He handed her a small velvet box, and Catherine opened it to reveal a stunning necklace, a delicate chain of diamonds and sapphires that would complement her engagement ring perfectly. "Robert, it's beautiful," she breathed. "But you've already given me so much." "I've given you security and comfort," he interrupted. "But you've given me everything that truly matters. Love, purpose, hope for the future. A necklace seems rather inadequate in comparison." "Help me put it on?" Catherine asked, turning so he could fasten the clasp at the back of her neck. His fingers were gentle against her skin as he secured the necklace, and Catherine shivered at his touch. They had maintained careful propriety in their physical relationship, sharing kisses and tender caresses, but going no further until they were married. The restraint was becoming increasingly difficult as their wedding day approached. "Catherine," Robert said softly, his hands resting on her shoulders as she turned back to face him. "Yes? I want you to know that our wedding night, there's no pressure, no expectations beyond what you're comfortable with. I know your marriage to Charles was dutiful rather than passionate. I want our physical relationship to be based on mutual desire and affection, not obligation." Catherine felt her cheeks warm, but she appreciated his consideration. "And if I told you that I desire you very much indeed, that I'm rather looking forward to discovering what passion feels like?" Robert's eyes darkened with desire, and his grip on her shoulders tightened slightly. "Then I would tell you that I love you more than life itself, and that I intend to spend our wedding night, and every night thereafter, showing you exactly how much." The promise in his voice sent heat racing through Catherine's veins, and she reached up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you, Robert Ashbourne, and I cannot wait to be your wife in every sense of the word." When he kissed her, it was with a passion that left them both breathless and aching for more. But even as desire flared between them, Catherine felt the deeper satisfaction of knowing that their love was built on a foundation of friendship, respect, and genuine affection that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The widow who had whispered her despair in a conservatory had found not just love, but a partnership that would transform both their lives. And the Duke who had offered sanctuary to a stranger had discovered that sometimes the greatest risks yield the most precious rewards. In 3 days, they would be married. In 3 days, Catherine would become the Duchess of Ravenswood, and their unconventional love story would have its happy ending. But even now, standing in the garden with the man she loved, Catherine knew that their real story was just beginning. The Duchess of Ravenswood, the wedding of Robert Ashbourne, Duke of Ravenswood, to Lady Catherine Whitmore took place on a perfect May morning in the private chapel of Ashbourne House. Catherine had chosen to forego a large society wedding, preferring an intimate ceremony attended only by close friends and the household staff who had become like family to her. She wore a gown of ivory silk with delicate pearl embroidery, her mother's veil, and the sapphire necklace Robert had given her. As she walked down the short aisle on the arm of Lord Pemberton, who had graciously agreed to give her away, her eyes were fixed on Robert's face. He stood waiting for her, with an expression of such love and joy that she felt tears prick her eyes. "Dearly beloved," the chaplain began, and Catherine felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a blessing. This was where she belonged, with this man, in this moment that would change everything. The ceremony was simple, but deeply meaningful. When they exchanged vows, speaking words of love and commitment that came from the heart, rather than mere tradition, Catherine felt as though she were being reborn. The lost, desperate widow who had confessed her despair in a conservatory was gone forever, replaced by a woman who had found her purpose and her place in the world. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the chaplain said with a smile. "Your Grace, you may kiss your bride." Robert's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of all the love and passion that awaited them. When they broke apart, Catherine saw her own joy reflected in his grey eyes, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The wedding breakfast was a joyous affair, with toasts and laughter, and the kind of warm celebration that comes from genuine affection rather than social obligation. The Dowager Countess of Westbrook had insisted on attending, and her presence lent an air of respectability that would help smooth their path in society. "To the Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood," Lord Pemberton said, raising his glass, "may your marriage be blessed with love, happiness, and the kind of partnership that enriches both your lives." "To love, conquering all obstacles," added the Dowager with a meaningful look at the assembled guests, "and to the courage to follow one's heart despite the opinions of others." As the afternoon wore on and their guests began to take their leave, Catherine felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. Tonight would be their wedding night, the beginning of their physical relationship as husband and wife. Robert had been patient and considerate during their engagement, but she could see the desire in his eyes, the careful control he maintained when they were alone together. "Nervous?" Robert asked quietly as they stood in the entrance hall, bidding farewell to the last of their guests. "A little," Catherine admitted, "but excited too. Is that terribly improper of me?" "It's perfectly natural," Robert assured her, his voice warm with affection. "And it makes me very happy to know that you're looking forward to tonight as much as I am." After their guests departed, they dined quietly together, the formal dining room feeling intimate and romantic in the candlelight. The conversation flowed easily between them, touching on their wedding, their future plans, and their hopes for the life they would build together. "I've been thinking about your idea for a foundation to help widows and other women in need," Robert said as they lingered over dessert. "I'd like to make it our first joint project as husband and wife." "Really?" Catherine's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "You would want to be involved directly?" "Absolutely. I think it's important that we work together on causes that matter to us both. And having witnessed your strength and resilience firsthand, I can think of no one better qualified to help other women in similar circumstances." "I love you," Catherine said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Not just for your generosity, but for understanding what this means to me." "I love you too," Robert replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "And I want to spend the rest of our lives supporting each other's dreams and ambitions." When they finally retired for the evening, Catherine felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness that was entirely different from what she had experienced on her first wedding night. With Charles, she had been a dutiful young bride, submitting to her husband's needs without truly understanding her own desires. Tonight, she was a woman who knew her own mind and heart, eager to explore the passion that had been building between her and Robert for months. Robert escorted her to the door of what had been her private chambers, but would now be their shared suite. The rooms had been redecorated for the occasion, with fresh flowers and candles creating a romantic atmosphere that took Catherine's breath away. "I'll give you time to prepare," Robert said gently, his eyes dark with desire but his manner considerate. "There's no rush, Catherine. We have the rest of our lives." Catherine's maid helped her out of her wedding gown and into a nightgown of silk and lace that was both beautiful and modest. As she brushed her hair and prepared for bed, Catherine thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been lost and alone, with no hope for the future. Tonight, she was beginning a new life with a man who loved her completely. A soft knock at the door announced Robert's return, and Catherine felt her heart race as she called for him to enter. He wore a dressing gown of dark blue silk, his hair slightly tousled and his feet bare. The informal attire made him seem more approachable, more human than the perfectly dressed Duke she was accustomed to seeing. "You look beautiful," he said softly, his eyes taking in her appearance with obvious appreciation. "So do you," Catherine replied, then blushed at her boldness. Robert smiled and moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach. "Catherine, I want you to know that tonight is about us, about our love for each other. If you're uncomfortable with anything, if you need me to stop or slow down, you have only to say so." "I know," Catherine said, reaching out to touch his face, "and I want you to know that I trust you completely. I love you, Robert, and I want to be your wife in every way." When he kissed her, it was with all the passion and tenderness that had been building between them for months. Catherine melted into his embrace, finally allowing herself to fully experience the desire that had been carefully controlled during their courtship. His hands were gentle but sure as they explored her body, awakening sensations she had never known existed. Their lovemaking was a revelation for Catherine, a discovery of passion and pleasure that transformed her understanding of what marriage could be. Robert was patient and considerate, taking time to ensure her comfort and enjoyment, showing her that physical intimacy could be an expression of love rather than merely duty. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the candlelight, Catherine felt a sense of completion that went beyond the physical. She was no longer a lost widow or a grateful guest. She was Robert's wife, his partner, his equal in every way that mattered. "I love you," she whispered against his chest, marveling at the way his arms tightened around her. "And I love you," Robert replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "More than I ever thought possible, more than I have words to express." "Do you think we'll be happy?" Catherine asked. "Really, truly happy. I think we'll be everything we choose to be," Robert said thoughtfully. "Happy, fulfilled, purposeful. We have love, we have resources, we have each other. What more could we possibly need?" Catherine smiled in the darkness, thinking of all the possibilities that lay before them. They would face challenges, certainly, society's continued scrutiny, the responsibilities of their positions, the normal trials of married life. But they would face them together, as partners who had chosen each other freely and completely. The widow, who had whispered her despair in a conservatory, had found not just love, but a purpose, and a place in the world that she had never dared to dream of. And the Duke, who had offered sanctuary to a stranger, had discovered that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the most unexpected encounters. As sleep began to claim them, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. She had been given to a drunken Duke to pay her family's debts in her previous imaginings, but in reality, she had found something far more precious, a love that had transformed them both, and a partnership that would sustain them for the rest of their lives. Tomorrow, she would wake up as the Duchess of Ravenswood, ready to begin the next chapter of their story. But tonight, she was simply Catherine, beloved wife of the man who had saved her from despair and shown her what it meant to truly live. Home found. 1 year later, the Ashbourne Foundation for the Support of Widows and Displaced Women had become one of London's most respected charitable organisations, thanks to the tireless efforts of its founders, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood. Catherine stood in the Foundation's offices, reviewing applications for assistance with the same careful attention she had once given to managing her own desperate circumstances. "Your Grace," said Miss Thompson, the Foundation's secretary, "there's a young woman here to see you, Mrs. Sarah Mitchell. She's recently widowed and in rather desperate straits." Catherine looked up from her papers, her heart immediately going out to the woman who was undoubtedly experiencing the same fear and uncertainty she had known so well. "Please, show her in." Mrs. Mitchell was perhaps 25, with the pale, strained look of someone who had been carrying too heavy a burden for too long. Her clothes were respectable but showed signs of careful mending, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a worn reticule. "Mrs. Mitchell," Catherine said warmly, rising to greet her visitor. "Please sit down. How can we help you?" "Your Grace, I don't know where else to turn," the young woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My husband died 3 months ago, and I've just learned that he left considerable debts. The creditors are demanding payment, and I have nothing left to give them. I don't know what to do, where to go. I'm so very lost." The words struck Catherine like a physical blow, so similar were they to her own desperate confession in Lady Pemberton's conservatory. She moved around her desk and took the chair beside Mrs. Mitchell, reaching out to take her hands in a gesture of comfort and understanding. "You're not lost," Catherine said gently. "You're here, which means you haven't given up hope. And as long as there's hope, there's a way forward. Over the next hour, Catherine listened to Mrs. Mitchell's story with the compassion of someone who had walked the same difficult path. The young widow had been left with debts that consumed her small inheritance, no family to turn to, and no prospects for employment that would provide adequate support. It was a story Catherine knew all too well. "What I'm going to do," Catherine said when Mrs. Mitchell had finished her tale, "is arrange for temporary lodging at one of our foundation houses while we work out a more permanent solution. We'll also provide a small allowance to cover your immediate needs and help you explore options for employment or training that might interest you." "Your Grace, I can't possibly accept such charity," Mrs. Mitchell protested, though her eyes filled with tears of relief. "It's not charity," Catherine said firmly. "It's one woman helping another, one person who has been lost helping someone else find their way. I was in your exact situation not so long ago, Mrs. Mitchell. I know what it feels like to believe that all hope is gone." "You do?" Mrs. Mitchell looked at her with surprise, clearly unable to imagine the elegant Duchess of Ravenswood in reduced circumstances. "I do indeed. And I learned that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources, in the most unlikely ways. Your story isn't over, Mrs. Mitchell. This is just a difficult chapter, not the ending." After Mrs. Mitchell left with arrangements made for her immediate care and future support, Catherine sat quietly in her office, reflecting on how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been the one sitting in a chair, desperate and afraid, whispering her despair to the darkness. Now she was in a position to offer hope to others, facing similar circumstances. "Busy day." Robert's voice came from the doorway, and Catherine looked up to see her husband leaning against the frame with a smile. "A good day," Catherine replied, rising to greet him with a kiss. "We helped another woman today, someone very much like I was when we met. And how does that make you feel?" "Grateful," Catherine said without hesitation. "Grateful that we can make a difference, that our love story can help create other happy endings." Robert wrapped his arms around her, holding her close in the quiet office. "I'm proud of you," he said softly. "Proud of what you've built here. Proud of the woman you've become. The woman you helped me become," Catherine corrected. "I could never have done this without your support, your belief in me. We did this together," Robert said, "just as we do everything else." They walked home together through the London streets, their conversation touching on the foundation's work, their plans for the evening, and the comfortable details of a shared life. Catherine marveled, as she often did, at how natural it felt to be married to this man, how easily they had fallen into the rhythms of partnership and mutual support. That evening, as they dined quietly at home, Robert raised his wineglass in a toast. "To what?" Catherine asked, lifting her own glass. "To the woman who whispered she was lost and changed my life forever," Robert said with a smile. "To the love that began with an offer of sanctuary and became the foundation of everything that matters. To the man who heard my despair and offered me hope," Catherine replied. "To the Duke who taught me that home isn't a place, it's a person who chooses to love you completely." As they touched glasses, Catherine thought about the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. She had been lost, truly lost, when Robert found her in that conservatory. But his simple offer, "Then come home with me," had changed everything. They had built more than a marriage. They had created a partnership that enriched both their lives and allowed them to help others. The foundation was thriving. Their love had only grown stronger with time, and Catherine had found a purpose that gave meaning to every day. "Do you ever wonder," Catherine asked as they prepared for bed that night, "what would have happened if you hadn't come into that conservatory when you did?" "Never," Robert said firmly, pulling her into his arms, "because it was meant to happen. We were meant to find each other, meant to build this life together. I don't believe in coincidence when it comes to love, Catherine. I believe in destiny, even though I was a penniless widow with no prospects. Especially because you were a woman who had faced loss and hardship and emerged with your dignity and strength intact. You were exactly what I needed, exactly when I needed you." As they settled into bed together, Catherine reflected on the truth of his words. Their love story had begun with desperation and despair, but it had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. They had proven that love could indeed conquer all obstacles, that two people who chose to trust each other completely could build a life of meaning and purpose together. The widow who had whispered she was lost had found not just a home, but a calling. The Duke, who had offered sanctuary to a stranger, had discovered that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages. And together, they had created something that would outlast them both, a love story that would inspire others to believe in the possibility of second chances and new beginnings. In the quiet darkness of their shared bedroom, surrounded by the comfort and security they had built together, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that she was no longer lost. She had found her way home, and home was wherever Robert was, wherever their love could flourish and grow. The woman who had once been lost had become a beacon of hope for others, and the man who had offered her sanctuary had found his own salvation in her love. It was, Catherine thought as sleep claimed her, the most beautiful ending to what had seemed like an impossible story. But it wasn't really an ending at all. It was a beginning, the start of a lifetime of love, purpose, and shared dreams that would continue to unfold with each new day they faced together. From lost widow to beloved duchess, this is the story that proves love can find us even in our darkest moments. When Catherine whispered, "I am so very lost," and Robert replied, "Then come home with me," neither knew they were beginning the greatest love story of their lives. If you believe that sometimes our most desperate moments lead to our most beautiful beginnings, like this incredible transformation, don't forget to subscribe for more breathtaking historical romances that show us home isn't a place, it's a person who chooses to love you completely. Share in the comments. Which moment touched you most? The conservatory confession or the foundation scene? Let's celebrate love stories that remind us that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected hearts.